Hey, we are streaming now. Great. Hopefully, it'll actually go into the right place. I stream in so many different places that occasionally we end up going to the wrong place, and that's no bueno because you don't know where it goes in the internet here. So, anyways, we are streaming to my channel. Yay! So, we're gonna be talking hopefully tonight about how we balance religious freedoms and what harms caused by some aspects of religion. Now, this is a continuation of a topic that Shannon Q had been discussing somewhat with various people along somewhere along the lines of the harm that is generated by religiosity more than anything else, right? And this has also been going on with Friended Forever, aka Adam. He might be joining us. He says that he would like to come in, so I said fine. Actually, I invited him earlier, but I kind of like to get a dialogue on this because I'm having a decision in my head, I guess, between balancing what I believe to be correct in the sense that we need to have some kind of religious freedom, right? The anti-theists out there, the militant anti-theists say that, we don't want religion. Now, not many of them, matter of fact, probably very few, if any, go around saying, well, we need to abolish religion. That's just not going to happen. And I would be very much against that. But there are militant people out there that does that. Now, I don't think that that's going to be what the topic's about. I really don't want it to address that kind of far approach to this challenge of saying, okay, we have to have freedoms in society. And I am kind of generating it around America because I'm American, but I think it's applicable worldwide. But we know that there are harmful aspects of religion. Shannon Q again has been talking about A and B Christian counseling services, which I believe is a complete and utter scam. Katie Polson from Without a Crystal Ball has been talking about the harms created by religiosity and parents having kids die on them because of this. So I wanted to get a feedback on your from your guys, because I'm not an anti-theist in the regards that I don't think that we should abolish religion, obviously. But should there be a push to kind of lead people away from organized religion? Should religion be something that is in the house rather than in these massive churches that are like 2 to 3 to 1 to every school nowadays? And again, this is something that has changed at the societal level, right? This is not something that I'm saying we need to implement, but is there something to be said by, hey, there's just too much religiosity. There's too much damage being caused by these things. There's too much death. There's too many people doing atrocities in the name of Jesus or their beliefs. And is this something that belief should be at home rather than, at the forefront of everything? We have a society now that's getting very technologically advanced. And in order to have further advancements, do you think that moving away from organized religion, moving away from religion as a culture, should be more just set into the household? Let people believe what they want, obviously, but if not have their beliefs affects politics as much, because that encroachment on political belief and religious beliefs are where I start to see the problem. When we have a vice president who thinks that the earth is 7,000 years old, I foresee an issue with that, right? That kind of stuff. So anyways, anybody can come in here. I do have the video link in the video description. You have to be approved. Your video is turned off as you come in, so you can't really do anything. And I have to know who you are. And I will be checking out everybody who comes in before I bother to show you. And it won't be even with video. So I do have a bunch of people in here, but none of them have their cameras on. So you're not seeing any of them. Can one person at least have their camera on?
I don't think I can get my rear facing camera on. So
well, if not, they have to look at me the entire time. All right. Okay. So I got Hellbow Heathen. I got Caleb. I got Good Reverend of Dudism. I got Mr. Brass, and I got Anskar. Anybody else wants to come in? Be my guest. So I think there's only one person in here that really is a theist that I can say of. That'd be Mr. Brass, right? And Good Reverend, you don't count, even though you're a reverend.
Well, my religion is rather bullshit. So yeah, I don't really count. Plus, okay. I'm not a theist, as we discussed the other night.
So, Mr. Brass, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right. So, what do you think? I mean, you're kind of more of a moderate theist. I mean, you're not evangelistic, and you're certainly not what I consider to be a Christian.
Yeah, definitely not a Christian at all.
Yeah. So, where do you place yourself, and where do you want to draw the line on? Should we have religious freedoms to the extent we have them, or should they be reined in a little bit more? I mean, we can't do certain things in the name of religious freedom, right? You can't have certain kinds of animal sacrifice. You can't, do bloodletting. that kind of stuff. So should we increase those things and say, look, we just don't want this in society any longer because of the dangers?
I do agree that there are certain aspects of religion that are harmful that we do need to work on with it. Probably the most noticeable harm that I really can think of off the top of my head would be with homosexuality. I think that's probably the most noticeable harm that it's doing.
And is that regarded as far as like the narrative that it's sinful and therefore there's this push by religion?
It's not more of that, but it's actually, legitimately trying to discriminate against gay people, trying to harm them physically. That's what I think needs to stop. I don't so much like mind someone having their opinion on certain people. I don't like, obviously I'm not homophobic or nothing like that. I like gay people and stuff. I just think that I would be happy with tolerance, as long as it doesn't get to the point of just harming someone physically.
But where do we end that tolerance? Look, we don't have tolerance for people committing crimes in the name of religion, right? And abuse and things of that nature are crimes. But for some reason, we kind of look a different way when we see things like marital rape, when we see things like, well, I hate to say a circumcision because we're going to be talking about it another time, and I do want to readdress that issue. But bizarre forms of circumcision, like actually like the moil, putting the mouth under genitalia and sucking the blood or something. I find that disturbing, right? I find that to be very disturbing, even though it's a cultural thing, and I'm Jewish. But I don't see in a modern day society how that's something that is relevant to religion. And if God exists, I don't think he gives a damn about these types of archaic practices, right? So as a society, should we push for an elimination of them, either one legally, or two just culturally, by saying this is not acceptable practice any longer?
I would think culturally would be a better approach, because like if you've ever looked at a society that's actively like legally tried to impose it, generally it's only made the problem worse. Because like let's look at, for example, China, for example. They have active laws and they try to go out of their way to get religion out of China. But what they've done is that they've pushed religion like Christianity underground, and it's grown. So I find like if you make a system where you're through a legal perspective trying to silence them, you might end up just pushing it underground and making it build up stronger.
That's a legitimate concern. People will probably continue their religious practices in more of an underground way because people that have these, I'm going to call them bizarre religious practices, they're going to find a way to do them. If they have animal sacrifice or something like that, they're going to find a way to do them. Yeah, Ansgar, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think there's a big difference between outlawing a religion entirely and outlawing a practice that we see as barbaric and, archaic. By that standard, by that metric of it'll just go underground, should we legalize female genital mutilation? Should we legalize bloodletting because, people are just going to do it anyway? I mean, I think there is a point where you have to find some kind of a limit where you say, no, I'm sorry, this is objectively doing nothing but harm, no good. We can't allow people to do this just because they believe their God wants them to do it.
Yeah, I'm okay with that too. I think that there might be a chance of them going underground, but even then it still stems it in some degree, and then you can go after them another way. So I don't think that the pushback that if we do something legality wise, that they're just going to go underground and it's going to make the matter worse. I don't think it's going to make it worse, Brass.
If I also may say, like with the whole bloodletting thing, that's actually not really much of a religious thing. If you want to trace that back, that goes all the way to Galen from Greece, where they had this belief of the four humors, where I can't name them off the top of my head. But basically, the idea was that they would figure out, like, it was a medical practice that Galen came up with and Christians later developed. They kind of got the idea, they took it from them.
There's also ritual bloodletting, though, from different religious cultures that have nothing to do with the medical application of religious bloodletting. You know,
that's how we got it in America.
Oh yeah. I mean, even
About-
circumcision hails back to a blood sacrifice.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think there's a distinction we have to make. Like in America, the bloodletting was medical things, which not Thomas Jefferson, George Washington actually partially died because of it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, should we allow these things, even though they are religious cultural practices?
Well, I mean, that wasn't bloodletting. Wasn't initially. It was a faulty medical thing that we.
No, I get that, and they still, and in some cases, they still use leeches medically for various reasons, right? But under modern understanding of how we can actually use them with some kind of actual.
There's some
utility.
there's sometimes when accidentally back then they could help someone, like if they have a clot in their leg or something that might help a little bit. But outside of that, a lot of people, like, it was funny in the book I was reading on the Middle Ages about this, where they said people were actually better off praying than actually going to the doctor at times, because the best thing you get is bloodletting, and that would make matters worse. But yeah, it was, I have always had to make a distinction, because sometimes people attribute things to religion that aren't actually religion, but they're more cultural, and maybe they stem from bad practices that we've initially had. I think that there are some practices that we do need to, I think with gay people, I think there's modernity, and the culture is generally getting more accepting of them. I think probably maybe within a couple generations, it's obviously homophobia is still going to be around, just like how racism is still around.
Well, yeah, but we had to have laws to do that, though, right? I mean, it did take the implementation. See, people don't realize when I talk about my study, right? It's not really a studying problem. When I have a speech impediment, I really do. There's certain words that I just cannot pronounce. And implementation, yes. See, I could eventually get it right, but it's unfortunately when I'm in the conversation, my brain and mouth have a disconnect a lot, and it's certain words that I just cannot formulate the consonant and the vowel properly. And I've been talking about this lately because it's been coming up as an issue, and I never really thought I had to talk about it before, but unfortunately it's coming to the forefront. But it's nothing that I'm ashamed of. It's just in my past, right? It's just something that I've had to deal with all my life. But there's a real reason why I say that there's certain words that I have a very difficult time enunciating. And people, of course, call into question your knowledge when you can't formulate very easy words. But whatever. So what are you gonna do? Well, this is why I'm never gonna be a radio star, right?
I thought debris was pronounced debris until I was like 20. So
I mean, no problem, Steve. You know me. I've talked to you about that too with me, Steve. I have Asperger's autism. I've had a horrible speech impediment for my entire life, and I've basically gotten to the I'm obviously better than I used to be, and I got treatment for it.
Yeah, and people go and they get treatment for these things, and it's a lifelong process. But anyways, I don't want to focus too much on that. I just want people to notice that I am very self-aware of when there's certain words like implementation. I can say fine now, right? But there are just times when my brain and mouth just cease to function together, and I just can't pronounce certain words. But anyways, so back on topic. What about the non-egregious stuff as far as, well, not as egregious, because these are egregious things. I don't want to say they're not egregious, but for example, nobody was going around saying that you can't teach kids about creationism, right? I don't think we could ever make a law for that, because that's, unfortunately, people have the right to teach what they want. However, should we make it more of a cultural thing where that type of teaching is harmful, and put it out there that this is a harmful teaching? Again, going back to Shannon and her, A and B Christian counseling thing, it's a harmful thing, right? So what could we do as a society since we can't make legal things on this? We can't say that you cannot teach your kids about this stuff. You cannot do certain things. You have to have some kind of a religious freedom. So what do we do as a society without becoming anti-theist to say, look, this shit is bad. This shit is wrong. This is harming kids. We need to make it stop.
I would say comedy. I think that most people don't do a lot of learning, but comedy is a great anesthetic to bad ideas in the culture in general. If it becomes socially acceptable to laugh and mock certain ideas as just stupid, then they become fringe ideas. And fringe ideas is what, I mean, we'll never get rid of them, but fringe ideas is where we want them to be. You know, you bring up that something like ancient aliens, and most people are going to laugh at you, and that's a good thing. You know, and I think that making these bad ideas laughable, comical, I think that's a net positive for the culture.
I don't mind mocking them. I mean, some things I believe we can mock, right? I'm not against mocking like young Earth creationism as flat Earth. I don't think it's beneficial to mock things like, oh, Sky Daddy, this and that. I don't think that gets anywhere. But I do think that if you have something that is completely falsified, right? Young Earth creation is falsified. There's no question about it. I mean, it is just wrong. There isn't a matter of theist versus not theist. There's nothing that we can say where we go, well, you know, there might be a young Earth creationist God. No, that God does not exist, period. End of story. It is falsified. It's not going to happen. So I don't mind mocking those kinds of beliefs, right? Just like the flat Earth, we mock them because we know that it's falsified. But the God concept as a whole, that is not falsified, right? I mean, we don't have any way to say that gods don't exist, and it may not even be falsifiable, right?
Like, I think what would be also good is like this is actually working to a certain degree, but I think we need as a culture to do better with the schooling. Because nowadays people are at an ever increasing rate are getting out of young Earth creationism because they go to colleges, they listen to a biology teacher, they learn it, and some of them give up their religion because of that, and some don't. I've said it on Twitter all the time. I said, if your belief in God hinges on the Earth being 6,000 years old, then by all means become an atheist. You know.
Yeah, no, I'm okay with that, right? I mean, if people think that if their belief is contingent upon the Earth being young, and they find out that the Earth is old, they want to really leave religion and become atheists. That's fine, right? I got no issue with that. A lot of people do that, right? They feel like they've been lied to their entire lives. Now, it doesn't always happen that way. Wayne Fillmore left young Earth creationism, but he did not leave his faith. He still believes in Christianity, right? So either way, I don't have an agenda as far as what they believe, but I want people to have beliefs that are non-harmful, and I want beliefs that be true as much as possible, right? And I can't evaluate their God belief. I can't evaluate the belief that the Earth is young, right? That's something we can actually address. But I want to address the harm caused by beliefs, because we have these religious freedoms, because we have them greater than any other country, maybe with the exception of Europe in some degree, because Europe allows a lot of Islam stuff to go on, which causes harm. Then how do we balance that, though? I'm still waiting for a way of having the benefit of having the freedom to have religion, because again, we can't just get rid of it as a whole, but say to people, look, you have the right to do this, but it is wrong, and we need to like fight against it. And I'm finding it difficult to walk that line.
Well, I want to stick with the creationist argument for a moment here, because that actually has made its way into public schools it's in a number of states right now. This has gone up to, as far as I know, the state Supreme Court level. I'm not sure if it's actually gone up into federal appellate courts or even to the United States Supreme Court. But at this point, we're teaching mythology in a science class, and that is harmful. And that needs to be stopped. We should not be allowing these evangelical zealots to push their religious views in our science class. If you're in a private school, then go for it. You know, if you're in a private religious school, I have no problem with that, because you're paying for that with your own money. But because my tax dollars are going to support the schools in my area, I don't want that kind of bullshit being taught to the children in my area.
Well, but should we allow that harm? Should parents be allowed to teach things that are demonstrably false to their children?
In their own home, yes.
In their own home, yeah, sure. But I mean, even I'm talking about in a private school.
Ooh.
I mean,
It's a school. I mean, it may not be a public school. And again, I'm going on a limb here. I'm throwing this out there because I don't want to like have people say, well, Steve's against, teaching these things in private school. I'm not saying that. I'm just arguing, is it something we need to evaluate? Because if you have a private school yeah, they don't have any academic standards. Like again, with Shannon's once on her crusade for the A&B Christian counseling thing, they have no standards there. But does that mean we should allow it? Should we say to these private schools, hey, look you know what, you don't have you don't have to teach evolution, but you can't teach something that's false?
Well, see, we have to work within the construct of the First Amendment, which says that the government cannot, pick and choose religious winners in a very, very vague sense. The government cannot create any laws favoring religion or hindering the free practice thereof. So if people want to learn about, biblical creation in their own home, in their church, in their Christian school, that's fine, because that's being kept private. That is not being out into the public sector. So the government cannot say, okay, well, you can't do this in your school because of the First Amendment. So we would have to drastically alter that one clause in the First Amendment in order to be able to,
well, I don't know. I'm not quite sure we do. Again, if something is demonstrably false, right? What is and is not then covered under religious freedom?
Well, look at the Church of Scientology.
Well, but I don't think that's a church. I don't recognize it as a church. Nor does many other countries. Right?
No, that's. Go ahead.
Would it be? Do you think it would be ethical by our let's say First Amendment to require that any school, let's say, or that wanted to call themselves a school, a place of education, have to put some kind of like on cigarettes they have a warning label, hey, this can cause cancer. What if you had to teach, if you wanted to teach creationism in your school, that by the way, none of this is backed by the scientific consensus, just so you know?
Yeah, I mean, here's my thing that I would think about is like, I think that with private schools, eventually, like you should do is you should have competition between them. Like, how we do with a lot of things. Like if, we compete with them, and if you have basically one school that teaches young earth creationism, and you have another school that teaches evolution, and you find out that the school that's teaching evolution is doing way better in every aspect, people are going to say, am I really going to spend all this money when I can go to this other school that's demonstrably better? So I think that would be one thing. That's how we sort of deal with any private kind of thing, is where we allow competition between them. So they can, hopefully they can have a better outcome come out of it. I would say personally, like, I'm fine with whatever they teach in the private schools. However, I don't, just because I'm fine with them teaching it, that's not mean I don't encourage people to give it bad reviews, to tell it that it's a crock and stuff like that. You're perfectly allowed to do that. It's, you have the right to, as long as you're not like going to the school and throwing rocks through the windows. Or, if you're just protesting it, you're just complaining about it, that's perfectly fine.
My question, though, is you said that you can just create competition for this school. But if someone, I think that the draw of a young earth creationist school is that they're teaching young earth creationism. So Correct. The only way you can create competition for that school is to set up another young earth creationist school. That doesn't really make the ideas have to compete.
Yeah, I mean, actual public schools are not in competition with private schools. That is the correct information to put out. And by the way, this might be of interest to you. This is funny. I told these guys before we went on air, but there's another little thing that added on this. So I had asked Sci-10 if he wanted to come in, right? And Sci-10 said something along the lines of, he's on the road right now, but he's in Florida. He's like, you're in Florida, aren't you? Where about? And I'm like, no, I'm in California, but close. And he said, well, how did I get Florida? He's like, I must have confused you with SJ. And I'm like, yeah, because people confuse S.J. Thomason and I all the time. We're so much like each other. I get it. I get that, Cy. Oh, I'm rolling here. I'm like, really, Cy? How the hell do you confuse me with S.J. Thomason?
It's actually funny because I've actually talked to S.J. and I said, your school isn't really that far from where I live. We live, like, if I wanted to walk over there, it'd only be like maybe I wouldn't walk there, but if I was taking a bus, it would only be like an hour and a half to 2 hours to get there. So it's
So
not even
about
that
20
big.
miles.
Yeah,
So,
about
somebody,
that.
somebody said in the live chat, Kiwisa said, I think, truthfully speaking, I think private schools should not be allowed. And I'm wondering if that's something that we should discuss. I mean, again, they're schools, right? And to me, school implies education, right? And if you have a public school that, if you want to teach something that is questionable as far as religion, I get the religious freedom for that. But I do not see how it is ethically or morally sound to say we should allow people to demonstrably teach people things that, especially kids, that we know is false, right? There's not even a matter of it. It's not something that we just say, hey, these are just beliefs, right? You know, you can teach somebody that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. Okay. But what we can say is the earth is not 7,000 years old. That is something that is demonstrable in science. So at that point,
And
do we
it's not
step in and
flat.
just say that you can't teach this kind of stuff? You can't teach stuff we have shown to be wrong.
I actually have an idea on that. What if okay, if you're like right now we require kids to get educated, right? They have to be in school. What if that requirement was only fulfilled at an accredited school? So you could, in your own time, educate your kid on the side in a private school on young earth creationism if you want, but that kid is required by law to be in a school that's going to also be teaching them science. Then there's at least something competing in their mind.
Yeah, that's a step in the right direction, right? I'm okay with it. More okay with that, at least.
I mean, it would at least be an attempt.
Yeah, but the reason I'm saying this is because if not, you couldn't put anything under the umbrella of religion, right? I can say, hey, you know what? I know people say this is false. I can say the Earth was created last week, but you know what? This is my religious belief. So you can incorporate anything under that clause of religious freedom, and I think that is not the intent of the forefathers when they had come up with this separation of church and state. It wasn't to allow people to say, I believe all these really inane, egregious things, and then say, well, you know what, this is my religious freedom. That was not the intent. No offense to the Dudism here, but obviously stuff like Dudism was not intended by the forefathers. It's just a natural outcropping of it that has been allowed because of a wide, very broad way of interpreting religious freedom, right?
And that's why we have cults like Scientology coming up. That's why we have, you know, cults like the Watchtower Society.
But see, yours is innocuous, right? Dudism is innoculism. Oh, excuse me, is innocuous. But when you're looking at Scientology, that is not. That is a harmful outcropping of this too broad of interpretation of religious freedom.
And they're getting away with so much shit. I mean, they are kidnapping, they are falsely imprisoning, and you know, depending on various stories that you hear from people who have actually had to escape the church, not just leave it, but fucking escape. Yeah, they're being beat, they're being tortured, they're being forced to crawl around on their hands and knees on thick, rough industrial carpet for hours on end until they bleed. I mean, how the fuck is that? Exactly.
How does that even remotely qualify as something under religious guise?
I don't know.
Like
I
many
honestly don't
many
know,
countries
because
don't even consider it a religion; they consider it a cult.
What was that?
Some countries, like I think Switzerland, I'm not sure, but a lot of I think it's either Switzerland or Germany or something like that, where they don't even consider it a religion; they consider it like a cult.
And I think
it's required to pay taxes and stuff like that.
And that's probably why they don't have a real strong base in those countries, because L. Ron Hubbard's whole thing was not paying taxes. He spent God knows how many millions of dollars over the decades fighting and harassing the United States government just to get tax exempt status, so that they could finally, hold it up and say, hey, we're now tax exempt. We are recognized by the government as a religion. And the only reason why they're able to do that is because the IRS got tired of all the goddamn lawsuits that were basically frivolous. And the government finally said, you know what, it's cheaper just to let you have your way.
Yeah, I think that was a bad mistake.
Yes.
I really do. I think they should have fought that out, because it opened the door for too much similar things. Sarah B at $5. What about public schools where all the children have smartphones and access to pornography? Is that more of an issue than a religion? That's an issue. Yeah, that's not a religious thing. I'm all for libraries and I'm all for computer access, but there has to be limitations. I'm sorry. You don't have a right to go to a library to watch porn. There's no right that you have bestowed to you by the Constitution for that. I'm sorry. This very, very liberal interpretation of a lot of these things, I disagree with. I really do. And I'm a First Amendment advocate. I'm a Second Amendment advocate. Certainly Fourth and Fifth Amendments. And yet, even I say, look, we have to have a line of demarcation here. We have to have a point where we say this is a way too broad interpretation.
I don't like how it's sort of implied as a public school thing only, because I know plenty of private schools where you have access to cell phones and you have access to all that sort of thing as well. Like as just in the super chat, I don't like how they said how it's a public school thing. It's not just public schools. Private schools can just be as bad as private, unless they like specifically make sure you have no technology at all.
So Steve, are you telling me that in the First Amendment, it doesn't say the government shall not, impede my right to look at lewd imagery on the internet?
Yeah, believe it or not, it doesn't have that. Matter of fact, I could probably venture a guess that when the forefathers came up with that, the concept of pornography wasn't even a thing, right? I mean, the closest they would probably have was some kind of very
burlesque
black and white
shows,
sepia tonage thing where you're like, is that a nipple? I think that's a nipple. We have nipple. Yes. Go George. Yes, Lincoln. Yes. High five.
Well, no. Thomas Jefferson just had slaves.
Oh.
That was just his thing.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I think what the problem is really when it comes down to, if you actually look at the history of the Constitution, which I looked up Mark David Hall. He's a leading professor on this sort of stuff, where he went into the history of it, and it's actually pretty funny when you look into it. It's like the First Amendment was deeply something that the religious people were wanted, because back then, because the Church of England was persecuted, like they were making it so that it was harder for other groups to practice their religious beliefs. So when they came over here, they were saying, all right, look, we want to be able to practice our religious beliefs. Are you not going to make a national church? And the Thomas Jefferson, he said there is a wall of separation between church and state with the Danbury Baptists. What people don't often bring up is that his saying of the hedge between the separation of church and state actually came from the Baptists. That's how they knew it, because he looked up one of their founders and he had mentioned it. And so it was very much the religious people that were fighting for the First Amendment, to separate church from state.
Well,
Jefferson, he said that he didn't think that the First Amendment went far enough, because he actually wanted to, build a wall of separation between church and state, but he ultimately had to settle on the compromise that we ended up with.
Yeah. And look, I'm for separation of church and state, and I think that any rational theist would want one as well. Because think about this, though. Think if you're a theist, right? Why would you want anything but a separation of church and state? Yes, I understand you want to have your own theocracy. I get that narrative. However, the likelihood of your theocracy being one implemented in the country they're in versus somebody else's theocracy is very slim. So why take the chance, right? Because all these people are pushing for what they want, right? Even have people like pushing for Islam in America, right? If they wanted to implement Sharia law all over the place, the Christians would be going like, oh, wait a minute. No. We don't want that as a theocracy, right?
Well, I mean, another thing is, like, I think people need to realize is that also it's like, I find that with certain things, as long as they're not like specialty favoring one religion over the other, is like, they say, okay, you can have, like, they say Christians, you're allowed to do like X activity here in public, but however, if Muslims want to come and do an X activity there, we have to allow them as well. It's not favoring any one religion in that sense, because
they've done that with Satanism, right? I mean, with the whole statue of Bahamut.
Well, yeah.
Same principle.
Well, I mean, the Church of Satan actually qualifies for tax exemption, but they don't do it.
I learned that recently. Yeah, that's crazy.
We were featured on their webpage at one time. We were actually on the Church of Satan's webpage when we had interviewed Derek Deicide, actually.
That's lovely.
By the way, I don't know who this person is. eFire Sky messaged me. I don't know who you are. So,
hi, Steve.
do you guys know who he is? I'm only letting people in that I know or can validate, and that the cameras are turned off. So,
And
I'm pretty new to the community, so I don't know anyone.
Yeah,
here.
I know this dickwad that's coming in. Hey, Jim.
I just wanted to say in the lull in the conversation, hi, Steve. Haven't talked to you in a while.
Is that Yada?
Yeah.
Yeah. What's up, dude? It's been a while. Yeah, I know. A lot of stuff just gets in the way. So you're always welcome to my hangouts, though.
I'm more an audience member, anyways. I just want to tell you, Zoom works on my old computer. So
it is a great program. It's very easy to use. I like the way it streams. You don't need an encoder with it. You don't need OBS or XSplit. You can actually stream directly from Zoom. You can have a multitude of people in the hangout. But we have the paid service, so that's why. I don't know about the free service. If somebody can tell me if you can stream from the free service, let me know. Jim, what happened to you? You got muted. I didn't mute you.
You cannot stream from the free service, unfortunately. Okay. But you can join another person's stream. You just can't start one yourself.
Why can't we see your beautiful mug?
I am out tending to horses. I got 8 horses in today that I weren't supposed to be in until next weekend, and I had to rush to the store to get medications and vaccinations and get a pen ready for quarantine. So I've been busy all freaking day.
Well, you missed the first half, so you want to weigh on it as you get up to date on the topic, because we're talking about basically religious freedoms and the extent that they should allow them to have religious freedoms, and knowing full well that there are harms and benefits of religion. Now, I'm not going to say that everything is harmful about religion. There are some benefits out there, but I think that possibly there's an argument to be had that even those benefits can be replaced by humanism. I understand that argument. I really do. But what can't really, or what won't be or shouldn't be replaced, is the fact that we don't want the harm to be out there, right? And there's a lot of things about religion that are harmful. We have to face those realities. So where do we draw the line to say, look, we want to have religious freedoms, but at the same time, we don't want to have the child deaths. We don't want to have the scams that are going on with the educational system, like the A and B Christian counseling thing. We don't want to have groups like Scientology. We don't want everything to be under this umbrella of religion, saying, you know what, I can teach my kids in a private school that the earth is 7,000 years old because that's my religious freedom to do so. No, I'm getting to the point where I'm really saying, no, I don't think that is a fair argument any longer to say we can teach something that is demonstrably false. That's not education.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. And as far as where we draw the line, I think it's very simple where we draw the line. We draw the line where harm, where your religious beliefs ultimately result in the harm of somebody else. But the only problem therein lies is, in my opinion, inarguably the worst harm that is done by religion is done to the children of the religious. Indoctrination, to me, is the most abhorrent a part of religion, is that forcing these beliefs onto your children. So, I mean, in my perfect world, nobody would be indoctrinating their children. I mean, with these harmful beliefs. Now, I can understand, somebody indoctrinating somebody being misled because because all the information out there for a certain thing is bad. But when it comes to something like that operates on unverifiable evidence like religion, then indoctrination can take many forms depending on what ideologies you're implementing into that.
Well, I mean, if you actually look into some of the literature on it, it's like one of probably the most dominant religion, because they've actually looked at, they've told the younger generation about who identify as Christians what they exactly believe, and it's actually gotten to the point where they actually just call it, I'm trying to remember the term, moral therapeutic deism, where they have basically, they don't really fit the mold of anything that we would consider Christianity in the sense, but they just happen to identify as Christians because cultural reasons, and they just happen to have a vague list of beliefs that they have regarding it.
But is that what we incorporate to mean religious freedom? I mean, if you have some vague cultural reference, Again, that leads into things like Scientology. We all know that's not a real religion, right? We all agree that's a scam.
Well, and in the name itself, religious freedom. I mean, in the name itself, you're not applying any boundaries to what religion is. So, I mean, if you want to have religious freedom and you're wanting to limit these harmful beliefs, I mean, those are two completely contradictory concepts and schemas. You're not going to be able to get one with the other present.
Well, I agree with that. That's the point. I mean, it's the same thing.
Right.
You can't have 100% security and 100% freedom, right? You have to sacrifice some freedom to have security. You have to sacrifice some security to have freedom. That's the way of the beast, right?
Right. Well, I mean, what you're talking about is implementing some sort of religious regulation or some sort of religious checks and balances that say, okay, you believe this, and if it fits these moral and ethical parameters that we've decided, that you're not inundating anybody else with your ideology, and that you are like Christopher Hitchens says, religion is their favorite toy. You can't take it away. But all that I ask, and all that Christopher Hitchens asked, was that you play with those toys in your home, and you play with those toys with people who want to play with your toys. You don't tell me that I had to play with your toys, and you don't tell my kids that they had to play with your toys. You don't bring your toys into school, and you don't bring your toys into a government facility. And as long as they are playing with their toys, and they're not telling somebody else, hey, if you don't play with my toy, you're going to hell, then fine.
No, I've heard his analogy on that, and I hate to say it, I actually really kind of agree with it. And the reason being is that, one, religious freedoms do start at home, right? I mean, you can't be the thought police, and you can't be the police to say this is what you can and cannot do in your own dwelling, right? That's never going to happen, right? People have the right to do what they want, but when it extends into a cultural, societal realm, when you're saying, hey, let's build these churches, and these churches are going to preach something that we know is demonstrably untrue. I like what you said. You said something along the lines of having ethical and moral review, or standard, right? I think was the word you used. Yeah. And by the way, guess what? That's philosophy, people. Yeah, philosophy. That's not science, right? So philosophy of the efficacy of these issues, and maybe they need to set up some kind of theological review board or something along the lines, because I think they're allowing for too much, and I am moving my needle towards that. Again, it's not anti-theism. I don't want to say that, so I got to think of another term for it.
Anti-religion.
So anti-harms of religion, right? Anti-harms of religion.
So to kind of put this whole idea into perspective, you can take something that has been demonstrably harmful to our society, something like the Second Amendment, like the open right for everybody to own weapons. That is not a true Second Amendment, because there are so many regulations on it. You have to be certified and have a permit for a certain level, and so on and so forth. But I digress. But my question is something as crucial, as fundamental and pivotal in the formation of our country as the First Amendment, specifically the freedom of religion, which is the entire reason that the United States was founded. I mean, how do you go about changing that? Because in order to implement any sorts of checks and balances, you would have to first amend the First Amendment.
And that's something that I brought up earlier. It turns into a slippery slope.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have people who are implementing the checks and balances. Like, we have to ask ourselves, like, who are we going to trust to say, what is harmful and what isn't harmful? Like, what sociological and what psychological implementations are we going to use in discovering these things? Is there anyone? And another question, even bigger question, is there any one algorithm that can be all encompassing for all religions?
No, and I don't think it's an algorithm. I don't think it's a one size fits all. But we always give the ability to make these decisions to people. We have judges, right? We have doctors that make medical decisions. We have people looking at the Second Amendment and going, hey, you know what? The right to bear arms. Or, you know what? You can't own a nuclear weapon, right? But hey, that's my Second Amendment right. I can own a nuclear weapon, right? I have a right to protect myself against all enemies, foreign, domestic.
But you don't.
But that's because people haven't interpreted these things. People have said this is where we draw the line. So why is it any different with religious things? Why can't people draw the line and say, look, these things are false. We know them to be false. The earth is not flat. The earth is not 7,000 years. You cannot teach these things in a private school. What if I wanted if I want to start a private school, Jim, and I said, I want to start my child with the belief that the earth is flat. So I'm going to start a private school, and we're going to teach children that the earth is flat. Most people would probably go, hey, wait a minute. No, that's not, hang on. People would be like, no, you can't do that, right? No, but that's my religious freedom. I don't know why it hasn't happened yet. I'm hoping I'm not getting anybody some bad ideas.
Well, it's like the difference. Oh, you go.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say that's what I was saying, like with the algorithm, with no system of checks and balances being able to be all encompassing, because all it takes is for somebody to make up a religion that does not fit those parameters that can operate outside of it, and boom, they immediately have a loophole that is justified.
Well, I mean, no one size fits all. Again, you can't just by fiat say, look, no system's perfect, there you can't do anything, right? We all agree that no one system's perfect, but that doesn't mean we don't have checks and balances. That means we don't have review boards for certain things.
Right, but I mean, think about all of the medical procedures and psychological procedures and the different types of therapies that professionals are licensed for, but that are actually things that we don't fully understand how they operate. And these are all developing fields of science. Whatever sort of thing that we would implement in this scenario, in these circumstances, it would have to be something that is organic, something that is evolving, and something that is that will always be relevant. I mean, whether it's 100 years from now or 400 years from now.
Brass wanted to say something real quick. Go ahead. And by the way, real quick, people can call in the live chat. I think we tested it the other day. It doesn't show your phone number, or you can join by adding the link in the video description to Zoom and come in that way, or just click on it, and that should work as well. But you can call in from your phone if you got questions. Give it a shot. We'd like to see people call in to this stuff. But go ahead, Brass.
Yeah. I was going to say, a lot of it gets talks into checks and balances, but if, like, I was going back to Mark David Hall, when you actually look in the history of that's actually, it bears from a religious concept, because what the founding fathers got that idea from was the idea that men were sinful, and therefore you needed check and balances to maintain that because they were sinful, which I believe it was like James Madison said, if all men were angels, they wouldn't need government.
Well, I think that if all men could, have ethical things and guide their own morality, we probably wouldn't need any kind of government, right? I mean, but that's an idealized society. That's an idealistic society that just will never work, because that's not human nature. We as humans could never exist in that kind of idealized state. Well, Sabia, $5. Is supporting identity groups like feminism and others unconstitutional because my freedom of speech, use of words needs to be modified or non-existent?
No, because I don't really believe that's harmful.
Yeah, I don't problem. There's harms and benefits in any group for the most part. I mean, every group, no matter how vile they are, probably espouses one thing that most people would go, okay, at least I would agree with that. But feminism is one of those things that depends on what they mean by feminism. It depends on what degree of feminism, right? But I would never say I never say we should constitutionally ban feminism. That would make no sense.
Well, what we could do, and I don't know how. This is gonna take the conversation on a slightly different path. But we can always remove that barrier between church and state, and force these religions to abide by government legislature. And that would be one way to regulate it. But at the same time, you would have religious influence in government.
Yeah, and that's the main concern I have with this whole let's tax the churches, right? People are like, oh, we got to tax the churches, and I keep trying to explain to people, look at
dumb as shit.
Here's the argument that I have. The problem with taxing the churches is that people are not thinking this through. If they repeal the Johnson Amendment, if they allow churches to be non-tax exempt, now they can spend money to get their persons into politics, and they could the landscape of politics would change as we know it, right?
But they're already doing that.
No, they
Look
have
at how-
found. Well, hang on. They found loopholes to do it, but they still. But we can close those loopholes and we can catch those things, right? We can say you are not allowed to do this, and churches have lost their tax exempt status because of it, right? But if we just carte blanche say, you know what, we are going to tax you now, and all you churches now can be involved in the political process, that's going to be a minefield, and I think
It's more
that's
of a
not where
slight adjustment thing, I guess.
What?
Because
And what people don't take into consideration with that is that who do you think is really going to be hurt by that? You think the big like mega churches are going to be the people that you'd want to see get hurt, like the big mega churches are going to feel the brunt of that?
Oh, I would love to see
Right,
Joe
exactly.
Osteen feel the fucking
Like
full
the people
brunt
that
of
would get hurt the most would be like let's say a church in the ghetto, which is actually doing a good job
Mm-hmm.
at giving people an outlet, so they're not being in a gang and shooting up places.
Right.
Yeah,
that
no,
are
like I said, there's always benefits.
food,
to some kind, sure.
Yeah, they're actually having food drives and clothing and shelters and all this other stuff. I mean, most of these drives and stuff that you see and these helping the homeless and everything, these are put on and sponsored by these local community churches. And these local community churches, in my experience, even as a theist, they are much more willing and much more. They're very much so in it to help people, whereas the people in these mega churches, they're in it specifically to see how much of their floors they can cover in red carpet.
And that's a distinction to be made. And thank you for the 2 pounds, Mr. Denvader. I think that's a huge distinction to be made. My concern is more with the mega churches, right? My concerns are with these large church organizations.
Yeah.
I have no issue with the little corner, Baptist church that has, a small congregation and, they want to feed the homeless and have food drives, all for that kind of stuff. Right. I mean, but I've actually seen atheists would go, oh, you know what? I wouldn't even help those churches with their food drive because I don't want to be associated with them. I'm like, you're being an idiot. Right. I mean, if a church is having a food drive and they ask for help, I think atheists should go help them out. Right. Yeah. I really honestly think they should. I've worked in food banks before.
Yeah, I mean, I've done that. I've worked with churches before.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm currently fundraising through a Christian organization, I'm pretty sure. So there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah. So I don't want people to get the impression that I'm trying to say that we need to eliminate that aspect of religion. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination.
Would it be easier to sort of connect it less to their status as a religion and more to their status as a community or charitable sort of organization?
Well, that's kind of what we already did. I mean, because the whole point of them not paying taxes is because they had at one point in history proven themselves to be a benefit to society, to those who can't help themselves, to the widows, to the orphans, and to the poor. And at one time these church doors were open, but now you can hardly find a single church in the United States whose doors are not locked 6 days out of the week with a homeless person sleeping on the streets within a mile of it.
So you think it's a case of more checks and balances basically coming in and making sure that...
Well, this is just a pure case of complacency, both on the church's part and even more so on the government's part for not implementing these checks and balances, because it said, oh, they've been doing good for this long and we haven't done this, so we're not going to do it, and completely just ignore and overlook the entire reason that they don't pay taxes in the first place. And in my opinion, if they're not providing these resources and these amenities to the helpless, I mean, like they said they were, and the whole reason that they're verified and not paying taxes, then I believe that they should be penalized, not necessarily forced to pay taxes, but I believe that they should be penalized, or maybe because I mean they are not free from being fined, right? So maybe we implement some sort of a fine or some sort of a fee for these churches who are not doing their non-taxly duties.
Well, I think there needs to be oversight, though. I mean, here's the thing with most churches, there's a lot of money to be handled, right? And a lot of that money goes to overhead. Some of it goes to playing the lay clergy, but a lot of it is actually going to misappropriation. Every time I've heard scandals, it's always because of misappropriations of funds, right? If the funding was supposed to go to just the operation of the church, lay clergy, and then the rest to feeding the homeless and to provide shelter and that kind of stuff. That'd be great, but that's not what I'm seeing in a lot of these churches, right? I mean, people are making these into businesses, and that's not the intent of a 501c3.
Right.
No,
And that's what really gets me, I'd say. It's just like in New Zealand, we have it. We've got Destiny Church here, and it's basically a business being run, and it's awful because they prey on minorities who have a culture of religion and are from poorer parts of the country, and they basically take all their money. And the dude who is the founder of the church drives around in these nice ass cars and takes flights to his mansions all over.
Right. Is that something we should go after then? Because that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's something I think that crosses a line of religious freedom at that point. That's abuse.
I mean, I'm just saying, like, taxing the church would not really, like, we all don't really like the big mega churches, but they wouldn't be in the slightest bit inconvenienced by that.
No, it would be the small churches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that would be worse because you would get a bunch of communities that very much rely on the churches for whatever reason, for maybe some cultural, and it's a way of they bond together in the community. You would get more of a problem from those than you would get like the Joel Osteens and the other ones. They're completely fine.
I have a question for you guys, kind of on topic here. So, my wife, for instance, before we met, was having problems leaving her husband, and we're not going to get into all that, but the church that she belonged to at the time basically told her that, we could help you out more financially if you were actually, coming into church more often. Now, at the time, she couldn't actually bring her kid into church because of low immune system and stuff like that. But this was a very common practice in the church where, we'll help you out, but we really need to see you coming into church more often to get the financial help that you need.
Oh, that bugs me. That's not altruistic.
Right.
Well, I mean,
right. So what would you guys do about that? What do you guys think should be done about that?
Okay,
I think
if I can,
there should be complaints done about it, but I think there should be complaints about it. However, it's like a church, like any other places, like, I'm trying to word it, like, they register as like a charity, so they have to give a certain amount, or they have to do something that's resembling a charity to, like, they have to go to a certain extent in order to get their tax exemption.
No, they don't. There is no oversight. There is nobody looking over their shoulder saying, are you spending this money on what you're supposed to be?
I mean, generally we do know this, like, we do know, like, from multiple studies, like, America, when it comes to charity, America is the top nation with it, like the top country that does charity. And a lot of that does come from the churches. So, I mean, I believe Godless Cranium was one that said how religion in America is like worth, like, I don't know, like $1.2 trillion or something like that. And I said, even if only 1% of that money actually goes to charities, that's still more than pretty much any secular organization can really hope to compete with.
Yeah. Like, so when I was a preacher, we had our own finance committee, like for our church, and they were basically just a board of church members of clergy that their sole position was to delegate how we spend the church funds. And we budgeted and everything like that, and we would develop a budget for the year, and outline the different expenditures for each line item in the budget, and there were certain people on the board who were responsible for each subcategory, I guess, of financial spending. But the only problem there is like that is your only checks and balance. I mean, unless something gets leaked from the inside from your finance committee, nobody's going to know what you spend it on unless you divulge that information. But the problem here lies, like you were saying, you're saying that if your wife doesn't come to church more. My grandmother, I found out that she was having to go to a food bank twice a week, because one in her town, and then go to another town and get one because the first one didn't give her enough groceries, because her church said that if she did not start tithing more, that they were not going to allow her to be the choir leader. She was the choir leader in church. And they said that because she was not paying her 10% tithes and she's on a fixed Social Security income, that she's not doing her godly duty, so therefore she cannot be in a godly position or in a church position like that. So we have these harmful things that religion does that are objective, right? Like we have these African pastors over there that stand on people's chests, that make people eat grass or drink gasoline, or they make them handle snakes and all these other stuff. So that's objectively harmful, right? So it wouldn't be hard at all for a system of checks and balances to look at that and say, okay, this is not right. Like we're going to do away with this. So that's already legal. Like anything that is objectively illegal is already done. Like Jim Jones didn't get away with making people drink Kool-Aid, like just because it's religion or whatever. But the problem lies is that there are some things that don't necessarily have legal repercussions, but they most certainly have individual repercussions for that person, whether they be psychological or financial or whatever, like in this case. So I mean, there has to be something has to be said for these things that are kind of nuanced and kind of on the line, and they're iffy, maybe they're psychologically damaging, but that's really subjective, whether you're religious or not. And so we really need some sort of an oversight team that is willing to overlook the whole fanaticism behind it, and the whole and regardless of the person's convictions, if the practice is harmful to the individual, then there needs to be somebody there to say, you can't do this.
I agree with you completely on that there needs to be some sort of oversight. But at the same time, a lot of those abuses that a lot of these places do are actually covered by ecclesiastical practice or guidance.
That's what I'm saying, though, is like if your religion has a doctrine or a dogma or any sort of commandment or delegation to do this harm to somebody, or any sort of justification to do this harm, then I believe that at that point they need to be given one of two choices. They need to either amend their scripture, amend their doctrine, or they need to completely abandon it. Because I mean, and that's what it's going to come down to. Because I mean, if you look at all these different sects of Christianity and the different belief systems, we can already see the moderation in Christianity amongst some sects. Like for instance, most of these small community non-denominational churches, some Nazarene churches, and even some small town, Baptist, Methodist, and just small town Protestant churches. But like somebody said earlier, I think it was Brass talking about these large organizations such as the Vatican and the Catholic Church and all these other larger organizations. We really need to track these this evolution of these religions, so that way we can look out for these warning signs of, hey, these people are starting to get into this fanatic territory. They're starting to get into this territory where they're causing some possible psychological harm here. And I believe that maybe some sort of a grading system, like maybe a Better Business Bureau for churches or something like that, should be put into place, should be implemented, if not for anything, just to give the general public an idea of what they're getting into when they join up with the religion.
Well, that was my idea for some kind of ecclesiastical oversight, and I don't mean like an imam thing. I don't mean ecclesiastical as in, oh, we want to make sure that this is in accordance with scripture. No.
That's what I thought you were saying.
Not the same thing, right? Don't conflate those two. They're vastly different things of what we're talking about here. But I do think
Steve, don't say conflate. Ugh.
Why?
No, I'm just fucking with you.
Another thing is, like, if I also may bring up something, is like, I
Okay,
think that we also have to recognize that a good number of the population are just fucking idiots.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they need to be protected from themselves, though, right, Brass? I mean, I'm sorry. We have things out there where we say yeah, this is abuse, right? If you say my religion is for this child to go down and eat grass off the ground or something, whatever the hell is that's abuse. And I've seen it happen in churches where they've done certain things. Like I watched this one video where their kids were on a line and the priest or whatever it was like shaking the kid and then slapped in the back of the head and they walked away. And I'm not talking like a little tap. We're talking, where they felt it and moved. We call that abuse. And if it's under the guise of religion, it doesn't make it any less abuse. I'm sorry. Why are we conditioned to think that the freedom of religion allows for something like that? It doesn't. And why are we not seeing people stand up in church saying that's wrong? We watch all these videos of people going out and pointing out things that are wrong. We see people standing up for doing what's right numerous times on YouTube. But what I don't see is videos of people in church standing up and saying to the pastor, the person in charge, what you're doing is wrong. What you just did by hitting that kid's abuse. I saw one video where the baby was being literally attacked by the clergy guy, the priest or whatever it was. I mean, just like, smacked around because I think they think that they're born evil and born with sin or they're demonically possessed. They kind of took the baby out away from the guy, right? I don't know if you saw that video.
But the only problem with that is that these people in these churches, I mean, if somebody doesn't agree with the way that a church is doing it, they're going to go to a different church. So you're not going to go to
abuse. Jim,
right.
This is outright abuse. Why, if this was not a church and somebody has smacked a kid, somebody would be going, hey, dude, I'm going to knock you on your ass. But because it's a church, we don't see anybody ever stand up and say that's wrong.
But it's because all these people are so encumbered with their religion, not just the religion, but with their individual church that they cannot see outside
not
of
one person in it. No, wait, but Jim, I'm asking you, not one person has the ethical consideration to do what is right in a church that's supposed to be about ethical concerns and being morally upright.
No,
not one person says what you just did was wrong.
Framework. But their idea of their own ethical framework, their own self-ontology is developed by the very church that they would be.
But not everybody in that church believes that way.
I think it goes deeper than that.
I think there's a group thing, but not everybody thinks the exact same thing. Yes, Caleb. And by the way, welcome, Raul. I'm not sure if I know who you are. I usually check everybody. I forgot to check you. My bad. I do. I'll check normally. But yeah, you seem cool. You're legit, right?
I was just going to say I have a story about that because I recently had to go to my grandmother's funeral when she was a pretty devout Catholic. But in the middle of it, the priest there, he started talking to, because I have a lot of young cousins who no more than 10, and a lot of them was sitting in like the middle of the church, and then at one point during the service, the priest goes up and starts talking to them specifically, and to everyone else there, because not everyone in the family was as religious as my grandmother, obviously, like me. But he talked directly to these young kids and told them that they should be coming to church to make their grandma, who is dead, happy. And that just really, like, it was that really rubbed me the wrong way. And I can't stand up to like say anything about it, because this is where my grandmother loved to be. She was a huge part of the church her entire life.
Maybe that's something we need to start advocating. Maybe we should start telling people, look, if you see things that are wrong in church, say something. And I even go one step further. If you're in a church and the pastor is saying something that's not just scripturally different from what you believe, right? I'm not saying like he's saying the scripture is this and you think it's something else. But if the church is advocating a position that is actually wrong and saying, yes, Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a velociraptor or something, right? Which for some reason seems to be the narrative for young creationists or something. But they say something that is scientifically false. Stand up and say something. Say, excuse me, Pastor, that's not correct. You're preaching something that is demonstrably. We should start a movement where people in the churches, because it's freedom of speech, right? And the most they can do is be asked to leave, right?
Here's the reason why people are standing up and calling out, hey, that's bullshit, is because one, they don't want to upset the herd, and two, if they do, they will be ostracized and kicked out of their community. And for a lot of those people, that's all that they have.
I social pressures, I get that.
Well, I mean, look at what's going on with the Catholic Church. How many Catholics are willing to stand up and say, I'm leaving the church, what my church is doing is wrong. I mean, these are much less in your face and much less egregious than basically, you know, a pedophile pipeline, and yet you can't even get people to stand up for that. So
and
that's true.
and then we kind of go back full circle, you know, to the, you know, big organizations versus these small organizations, because you have, like, you know, like in the 90s when the Native American church, when the government found out that they were using sacramental peyote for their religious rituals, they just went in there and just completely ended it. But what they didn't divulge was that this Native American church was the most successful. It was the most successful trial of getting people off of addiction, getting people off of drugs, and helping people lead more productive lives. And I mean, so this is something that, while socially it's not acceptable, it does have its applications.
Sure.
And so,
I believe that.
Right.
I have no issue with any of that stuff, Jim. None whatsoever.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying, though, is that the government interfered with this because they said that it's illegal, that peyote is harmful, yet at the same time, there's verifiable evidence that what they were doing was of great benefit to the community.
Well, that seems more that seems
so
like more of an argument to end the war on drugs than it does.
I agree.
No.
Government intervention in religion.
That's the bad side effect of this.
But the argument that I'm trying to make, though, is that this is just further credence to the fact that if we allow the government in any way to regulate this thing, it would obviously have to be something third party that operates outside of the government, like some sort of a watchdog agency. But I mean, if we allow the government to make these decisions and to set the parameters and everything like that, we really lose the potential to see something that can be potentially helpful for the entire population.
I disagree entirely.
That's why I think it's essential to have these third-party watchdogs, you know, so to speak, organizations, because they will not only, you know, they're not just attack dogs. They won't just jump on and latch their teeth in. I want an organization who will take the time to, first of all, understand the church's framework, understand the beliefs framework, understand how they operate psychologically and ontologically before you start analyzing them or assessing them in any way. And then you can get into the deeper things and say, okay, according to their dogmatic practices, according to their church traditions, their rituals, whatever it may be, is this harmful to the individual? And not just is it harmful to the individual, but does it have the potential to cause harm to the individual?
Yeah, I don't think that the government can't do that. I think the government can do a perfectly fine job of that. Just because we don't have the people in power right now that we need to, that agree with us, doesn't mean that the government is incapable of doing this. I mean, the government has been regulating things that are covered by different amendments for years. We, like you said earlier, we still regulate guns, even though we have a Second Amendment. There's still things you can't say, even though we have a First Amendment. I mean, just because you have an amendment doesn't mean, you know, you can't regulate it.
But the fact of the matter is that you're talking about the same government that condemned people like Jim Jones and all these other people who are hurting people in the name of religion. But at the same time, they're allowing Jehovah's Witnesses to faith heal their children and allow them to reject blood transfusions and ultimately have them die. And then when they go to court for it,
which is why we need standardized regulations.
They're cracking down a little bit on that.
Right. But what I'm saying,
after they have this many deaths, people are now
right. But what I'm saying is like this has gone on for how long, and it's taken this long for the government to step in.
I agree.
I don't think that.
But you can make that argument for anything.
Yeah, the wheels of government are slow.
They fucked up a bunch in the past, so therefore just nuke the system.
Yeah, the wheels turn slowly when it comes to the wheels of change in government. We all understand that, but they are changing. People are being prosecuted for neglect. Parents are being prosecuted for not feeding their child properly and things of that nature, and not allowing medical care.
But it's not done until after the fact.
Well, I mean, again, these are flaws in the system that need to be fixed. I mean, there was a
Right. It's because
story.
there's no oversight because
Hang on.
nobody's looking into this.
There is oversight. It's just the oversight needs to be better, right? I mean, there's
Well,
the social
well,
services dropped the
it's not just
ball.
oversight, but they need to implement these checks and balances and say, if you want to be a Jehovah's Witness, fine. If you want to ride your bicycle everywhere and knock on people's doors, fine. But do not refuse medical treatment for your child.
Well, again, these things are changing, right? I mean, the social services are finding out that these cult mentalities, not so much religion. I don't want to say JW is a cult, but the cult mentality that they have. I think it waters down the word cult, though. But whatever. People here say Mormon is a cult, and I was a Mormon, and I find nothing cultish about them, to be honest with you. And that's just not a bias, as I know the people. I've been to other churches where they do have a cult-like mentality. My brother was a cult-like mentality when he was a Jehovah's Witness.
Right. Well, I just want to clarify that I am okay with free exercise of religion, and I'm okay with people analyzing that free exercise, but it's just again, I feel like a broken record, but I just feel like it's really important to clarify the absolute need in any situation when it comes to religious oversight, that we have clearly defined paradigmatic limits to the way that these people can exercise their religion.
But at the same time, with how massive a lot of these, let me rephrase that, given the overall scope and size of religion in this country, how many tens of thousands of churches, from your mega churches that are the size of a football arena, a stadium, or just a little something on the corner that can fit 10-15 people in it. It's just too big to be able to monitor everything efficiently.
So I mean, what would you suggest in that case? I mean, because think about it. If we'd been doing this for 50 years already, we would have already had a very comprehensive database of all these religions, and it'd be a lot easier to update and upkeep. But I mean, yeah, well, I mean, if and when we implement something like that, it's going to be a fucking train wreck, because yeah, you're right. And like I said, there are so many sects just within Christianity alone that they all have their own different beliefs. Well, and usually it's not the fundamental beliefs that are the harmful ones. It is the ones that are loosely interpreted, the ones that are just by happenstance, And
well, can you give an example of what you mean by something that happens by Baptist states?
Oh, okay, so like like for example, like some an African preacher telling their congregation that they had to test their faith by drinking gasoline.
Okay, all right. So something like that is obviously very harmful in just every which way. I agree with you. Yeah, that kind of shit needs to be shut down. But
it's not doctrinal at all. So that's why it's important for whoever to do it to understand that framework, because you can't just look at the doctrine and say this is what they believe. I mean, we all know that to be true because we have one Bible and tens of thousands of religions from that one Bible. So I mean, it's easy to completely debunk that immediately, but it just lends more credence to the fact that we need not only oversight, but we need somebody to closely monitor the development and evolution of these religions and set some parameters for when we need to run interference and say, hey, you're heading in the wrong direction. You need to stop.
I don't think we need to understand a religion or that isn't part of their beliefs to say you're not allowed to feed people gasoline. Like, I really don't understand. I don't really understand the idea that you have to know the religion and tell people this isn't part of your doctrine to say, I'm sorry, even if you believe that, you can't do it.
Well, I mean, but people aren't telling that to, Jehovah's Witnesses about their kids refusing blood transfusions.
That's why we need to start doing that. Okay. That doesn't mean we need to start educating them about their religion, because people are going to believe all kinds of stupid shit. People believe the earth is flat. It doesn't matter what you show them is in their holy book. They're going to believe what is comfortable for them to believe. But you can set legal limits saying, no, you can't refuse your kid blood transfusions, and that does not require you understanding their religion. That just requires you setting boundaries of what can and can't be done.
Right, but at the same time, I'm not talking about addressing the individual. I'm talking about addressing the board, addressing the implementers of these religions. You know, the big bosses, so to speak. Like, for example, in the Pentecostal Church, the UPC board, the United Pentecostal Board. That's what I would that is who I would appeal to. I would appeal to them and say, hey, you know, because they're the ones who decide on everything from curriculum to church retreats to interpretations.
Let me just point out that polygamy is still in the Mormon book as no. It's still in the hold on. It's still in the Mormon book as something that is a moral good. However, also in their book it says you must follow the laws of man. Okay, so the only reason they don't practice polygamy is because it's against the law. We don't need to understand.
That's fair. That's true.
Right. So we don't need to understand Mormonism and go in and say you can't do this because we understand Mormonism. All you have to do is say, sorry, you can't do it. It's against the law.
Yeah, no, I like the fact that you actually hang on. I like the fact you framed it that way, because a lot of people say like Mormons practice polygamy. Like, no, they don't, and it bugs the crap out of me because I like to be factual. But what you said is true. So if people explain it that kind of way,
you're telling me you don't have multiple wives, Steve?
No, I just like facts. And I don't like any church having misinformation about them. Even the Catholic Church, I don't like that, right? So it doesn't matter what I belong to. I would have the same visceral reaction when people are saying, "Well, the Catholic Church believes this." I'm like, "Well, no, they don't. They have a lot of other shit that they do, but don't make it into something that they don't. Because if you promote false information, then people question the legit information you put out, right?
Right.
You don't need a lie to promote an agenda if your agenda is truth, right? So it's basically counterproductive in my opinion. But anyways, so, anybody want to call in real quick? We do have numbers in the video description. I'm trying to still test it out. There was somebody from Twitter that said I was censoring them before, and I told the person, look, I'm not going to censor you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open a hangout right now, and you're more than welcome to join. Why don't you come in and take me on, since you think that I'm censoring you? And he just did it again. I was like, do you not understand? I am live right now. Here's the numbers you can call. How the hell am I fucking censoring you if I have a platform right here and told you, call in, I will take your argument? How is that censorship? Do you use this word in a way that's completely an antithesis to where everybody else would use this word, censor? I don't see how promoting you to call and talk to you is censorship.
Well, I want to quote Inigo Montoya.
What the fuck is wrong with people, man?
It's a complete
the Dunning-Kruger effect to start.
So stop oppressing me.
Ridiculous.
So to get back on track, I kind of wanted to address what you were saying, about these, people breaking laws and just say, you can't do this. And that works great for these objective instances. But what about the subjective instances, like for instance, where they are basically extorting people for money to make these payments that they can't afford? People are putting themselves in debt. I mean, there is no law against that. I mean, there's no law against
actually,
and that's
actually there kind of is
ecclesiastical practice, and that's part of the reason why they're going after the Church of Scientology right now, because you have people going hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, if not millions, just to move up their quote unquote bridge to total freedom.
And actually, if you can prove that these donations are coming under duress, and that includes psychological manipulation because they're being told these bad things will happen to them if they don't or whatever, you can actually bring a legal case against them. So again, you don't necessarily have to understand the religion. You can actually use the laws in place.
Yeah, matter of fact, we do have laws against elderly abuse, right? Should we have laws against like religious abuse?
Well, here's the loophole to what you're just saying, Ansgar, is that I just fucking hate Scientology to my core more than anything else. But they actually make their members sign a contract stating that a Scientologist cannot sue another Scientologist, to include the church. And so even though they've left, they've already signed a contract saying that they cannot sue the church.
So The only problem with tithing, though, is that tithing is looked at as a free will offering, right? So nobody is I mean, even if they are coerced into it, I mean, very, very rarely does anybody win any of these cases, and it just ends up turning into a money pit for people that already can't afford these things. So I mean, wouldn't it be better to take these religions and group them into different categories amongst the different sects, and say, okay, these closely identify with each other, these closely identify with each other, then set those churches under a general umbrella and force the pastors or the church leaders, whoever's starting these churches, to register within that umbrella and have some sort of a third-party committee, watchdog committee, within that umbrella of each subcategory, so that way they can familiarize themselves with that, and they can say, okay, these are the parameters for this umbrella. You can operate, you can freely express yourself religiously within these parameters, within this umbrella, but and by registering with this, you agree to do it. But then again,
that actually seems a lot more difficult than simply like what did we do when we wanted to crack down on, let's say, child abuse crimes, you know, because they were going under investigated or whatever. In some places they still do. We create a special victims unit, we create a special task force. So if we're seeing in the area a place where there's financial abuse going on by the church or something like that, why not instead advocate to our lawmakers to put together some kind of a task force, you know, and a special investigations unit that looks into these churches for the abuses that they're causing. I mean, that's what they do to try and get to the Catholic Church.
That's the problem, though, is that these special victim units are mostly done after the fact, after it's already done. So the damage has already been done. Whereas if you have a third party group that is actually monitoring these churches and actually facilitating people to report, I don't want to say malpractice, but to report immoral activity or unlawful activity or psychological harm or any kind of harm within the church that violates
after the
general nuisance.
Right. Of course it does. But what I'm saying is that parameters have to be set. There has to be a line drawn somewhere. I understand that. Okay, so anybody who is who is encumbered with religion is undoubtedly doing themselves harm, right? And they're being done harm by the church by being indoctrinated and blah blah blah. So I'm not arguing that religion does not cause harm from the get-go, but what I am saying is that it gets progressively, or it can get progressively worse incrementally. So somewhere amongst those step ups into gradually getting more and more severe, somewhere there has to be a line drawn saying, okay, you cannot cross this, because once you cross this line, that is that's when the scale starts tipping into serious irreversible harm. So whatever that boundary is needs to be established, whether it's by psychoanalyst or whatever. They need to determine where that line is for each individual religious organizations, religious subcategories, however you want to do it. And what's important is that we need to be proactive. Okay, we can't just come in after the fact and try to fix things. We need to monitor things and have some kind of preventative method in place.
All right, hang on, Chef Jim. Let's hold for a second. I want to get a couple other people in here that have been trying to get in, and we all know that Jim loves his microphone. They're like one with each other. Goddess Ozzy, you there?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes. So first of all, I think it's the first time I've actually vocally spoken with you, correct?
G'day. Yep, that's correct.
Okay. Awesome. So we Ozzy and Goddess Ozzy and I have had our disagreement. We hugged and kissed it out, not figuratively speaking, but it's all good, right? We good?
Yeah, it's all good, man. It's just it just happened after 5 days straight of epistemology and philosophy, and that's all my Twitter wall was.
No worries, man. So what do you got to add to the discussion, buddy?
Well, I do agree with both sides of the argument, both with Jim and with Ansgar. Sorry, I think I said it wrong. Ansgar.
Ansgar.
Yeah, that's good enough. Ansgar, yeah. That's cool.
Thanks, Scott. Okay, I do agree to the most part, but also I think that all religion, as it stands right now, should go through public scrutiny in the form of government, to a degree, through licensing, through understanding, through waivers and things like that. So both the preachers and those that are organizing the religion and the participants of said religion know what they're getting into, much like the game ESRB board does for games.
Anyone else want to add on that?
Well,
No, you told me to shut
I'm kind
up.
of wondering right here with
If I
Well,
may
right-
bring up something, it's like I always get sort of worried when people like they ask for more government influence over something, because like it's always good to think like, oh, we can have this oversight, but we'd also have to realize that there is a possibility that it can be corrupted.
But any oversight can be corrupted, right? I mean, there's no perfect system. That doesn't
Well, I get that.
exclude
I'm just
us
saying, like,
working with something. Yes. I say hand up. Oh my goodness. Look at this hand from the illustrious sock account who's not using a camera, so you won't be able to see him. But sock account, did you want to weigh in on this?
Does he have it?
Yeah. Oh, geez, there's just been so much, but I'll try to keep it as brief as I can.
Oh, good luck with that.
I know. So the first thing is that the idea that you could have some type of committee going around, like the example he gave is like the ESRB for video games. Like you're gonna go and rate a church as like 13 or mature or teen or whatever. Like I'm not even sure how those ratings would even work on something like that. But yeah, I agree with the sentiment that like more government regulation isn't required. What needs to happen is the government regulations that are already in place need to be enforced. And exemptions for religious freedom should not be granted in cases that are clear violation of constitutional rights or the law. I mean, it really comes down to something that simple. If you have a church that encourages something like inequality among sexes, like that is a doctrinal thing within their church, and you can see that it's enforced in that way, that's a violation of people's rights. And people shouldn't submit themselves to that. And a church that is practicing such habits should be held accountable for those things. Things like discrimination, and hiding behind religious freedom as an excuse to commit acts of discrimination because it's your religious beliefs that people are less of a whatever based on gender or something like that is not an excuse. And so, and also like when it comes to things like child abuse. Now, you don't need to be proactive with the child abuse. You don't need, if somebody has a kid, we don't proactively go into their homes to make sure that their homes are suitable for having children there. But when things are reported, again, hiding behind the guise of religious freedom is not an excuse for a violation of the law. In those cases, there has to be this clear line of demarcation, and we already have it. It's the law, and that's what it is. And so, right. The problem isn't that churches are. That we need to go and we need to, rate churches or assess churches. What we need to do is make sure that, religious freedom is a great thing to have, and the fact that, nobody has to be pressured into a religion or, not following a religion or anything. But the idea that religious freedom would somehow exempt you from following things that are already laid out by the law or by the Constitution or anything like that is what needs to be stopped. Now,
but the only problem with that is that by using the things that are already in place in our legislature to regulate this, is that you are still bypassing what could possibly be the worst amount of harm, is the psychological harm that is not constitutionally protected. I mean, yes, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, sure. But it is not specifically outlined in legislature that actually holds any of these people accountable for the psychological harm that they deal. So somewhere, you're accounting for all of the objective harm, absolutely, especially the legislatively objective harm. That's perfectly fine. But what about the subjective harm, the psychological harm, the long-lasting implications that religion causes?
There are actually laws for that.
Yeah, first off, you'd have to present it like an example, what you're talking about. If you're just talking about somebody living with the fear of hell for their entire life, I would hardly rate that as a form of psychological abuse. I mean,
and I would disagree with you. I believe that indoctrination is psychological abuse.
I do have to agree with Jim here. The belief of hell over a period of lifelong is actually a form of emotional and mental abuse. But more so, I need to bring my point back. When I mentioned the ESRB, I meant more of the fact of public scrutiny rather than a rating system. More so having to overview the holy texts and just give it a basic understanding so that people can see what is morally right and what is justifiably right and what is lawfully right, if you know what I mean.
Well, no, there should be nothing that is exempt that's already in place by the law. Like, that's why I say that this is a meaningless endeavor. We already have clearly described laws that do protect against these things, and they need to be enforced. That's the point that I was making, is that you don't need to go through and assess these churches now and say, okay, are they, some of the things that they're doing morally acceptable? So we're going to, like waive them having to follow certain laws. We don't do that. So
that was my argument, though. That was my argument, though. Why are we not implementing the laws that we already have? If somebody's on a diocese and they smack a kid around, why is that person being arrested?
I have no idea.
Exactly.
That's the point, and I agree with you on this point. Is that is child abuse? If you were to see exactly the same thing happen in a Walmart parking lot, you would call the police. You would report
that was my argument, right?
Okay. And people need to stand up for this and report this. And when things are reported, they need to be handled. They need to be handled outside of the institution themselves. These reports have to be taken seriously because these behaviors have to be discouraged.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Like these whole Catholic internal investigations are completely bullshit, and that needs to be done away with immediately.
Yeah. But to the problem with for something they talking about like psychological abuse. Okay, I agree that if you are deliberately lying to somebody, and in the way that I believe Scientologists are, because I don't think that any Scientologist in the upper echelon of their organization actually believes the shit that they put out there. Okay. And in which case, that is an organization that is set up that by a guy that who said that if you want to make money, start a religion. Like this is clearly a fraudulent organization. In that case, yes, like you can point to if you're deliberately misleading people with threats, essentially, like whether it's that they're not going clear or whatever. I don't even know all the terminology for Scientology there. In that case, that's against the law. You can't do that. But when you try to compare this to something like Christianity, where the belief in the afterlife, heaven and hell, is that's something that I could definitely point to as might have adverse effects on people, but that's providing the case that these people are trying to mislead these people. These people generally believe this is true, and this is the majority of the population here as well. So if we're going to try to create some type of standard by which we're going to measure these things up to, or is going to every single religious organization out there and saying, listen, that you can't talk about anything that happens post-mortem anymore. That it's now against the law to talk about the afterlife. Like no one's going to support that. And what government do you think is going? If the government's going to raise up some type of standard for this, and they tell people that they can't actually start, they can't talk about these type of concepts, and everybody has to be, adopt some type of universalist position. That's a clear infringement on people's religious freedoms to believe what they want.
Yeah, no, I don't think I'm really advocating that.
No, there's a clear and obvious difference between setting a standard and enforcing the rules. Just to go ahead and bring back on a previous point, you said that there should be more fervent activity in regards to enhancing the laws, increasing the laws, making them more efficient. That could only
I never said that. Just
no, not you. I think it was Jim. Not you. Okay. I think it was Jim. Oh. But I think I agree to a complete point, whereas we can only be so good as reality will allow us to be, because we cannot be a minority of report. There's just no logical way that we can be a minority report kind of society.
So I think it's fair to say that, and if anybody disagrees with me, please let me know. But I think we can all agree that we can address these objective issues with the church, and even some of the psychological ones and the ones that aren't really covered by the Constitution. And I still believe that there are some that are not, but I digress to this other point, that even if we can implement this system where we are both proactively and reactively regulating these churches to ensure that they do not do any objective harm, at the same time, we have to keep in mind that they still maintain the doctrine that gives them justification to do that harm. So do we allow that doctrine to also stay around to possibly, because I mean, think about it, that doctrine can possibly, and has in the past, been used as justification for some of the most abhorrent crimes in the world.
You can't have a church change their doctrine, but you can shine a light on it, saying because of this doctrine, you're not allowed to do certain things.
But at the same time, how would that fit in with our current framework of the First Amendment?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, though, is that can you regulate doctrine? Can you make it to where they have to?
Let me ask you, Jim. Hang on, let me ask Jim a question. Should we outlaw like the snake handling thing, right? You're well familiar with that, obviously.
Yeah.
Would you, if you had hindsight, would you say, okay, if they would have came in and said, you know what, you cannot do this because of safety concerns, what would have your church done?
Would say it's our religious freedom. We have the free exercise
but they
clause
say
in
you can't. They're going to arrest you for it. What do you do?
They can't, according to the free exercise clause in 1990,
until you're not listening to me. If we changed it such that they can arrest you for this because of safety concerns, right? What would your church done?
Well, first of all, if they can arrest me for it, then there has to have been first some sort of regulation in place saying that I couldn't do that in the first place. Oh my God,
Jim, just dude, work with hypothetical for God's sake, okay? It's abuse of animals, and it puts you in danger. And they have they're making a law for it, right?
Okay.
And they made a law, and they say, Jim, you can no longer do this in your church. Do you change the doctrine, or do you keep practicing, or you just go to jail? What other options are there?
Well, you would have the more moderates who would stop practicing it and would have no problem amending it, especially the people who were freaked out and didn't want to touch them in the first place. And then you would have the people who are more fanatic and fundamental about it, who would fight it tooth and nail.
Would there been a split? Would there been a split in the church, you think?
No, actually, I don't. I don't think there would be. Like, for instance, the speaking in tongues things came up in UPC and really threatened to cause a huge divide in it, which it didn't end up doing. What they ended up doing was moderating it, and to where it was agreeable to both sides. So I mean, I think that is something that would happen
in a perfect situation.
Maybe they would pass around rubber snakes or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, then I wouldn't see a problem with that, right? But then it kind of goes against the narrative of handling snakes and with faith, right? I mean, it kind of diminishes the whole point of showing that you're capable of handling snakes and not being bit, which we all know is bullshit.
Well, it depends on the kind of snake and how you're handling it.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, you get a pit viper and you tell me how it works out for you, okay?
Oh no,
I'm not going to go into.
We're not talking about corn snakes, right? I'm happy with dealing with gopher, corn snakes.
You put a rattlesnake, I'll be happy.
I actually like snakes, but
you put a fucking rattlesnake in my hand, I want to throw it.
So
I'm not going to play with rattlesnakes, man.
So what role should politics play in this? How do you think that would develop politically?
Well, I mean, I can see the political justification for it. I mean, again, if there's a harm to the animals, or if there's a safety concerns, when we've had people being bit, right? Let's be realistic. This goes back to what I said about things that are demonstrably false, right? It goes back to the very start of this discussion. Should we allow for people to put out clearly misinformation that is clearly been falsified? Now, if the narrative is such that I can handle snakes and I won't be bit, and we have overwhelming evidence that, guess what? People get bit, right? It just Jim, you've seen it happen, right?
Doesn't that mean they weren't true Christians?
But at the same time,
exactly. God, didn't have enough faith, Sokka, clearly.
But at the same time, 2 years ago, I was posting memes telling people to drink bleach. I mean, so I mean, that's not religious, but can I be arrested for that?
Seems mean.
If you're to tell someone straight up, "Hey, go drink bleach," fuck you. No.
It was a very misleading meme. I forgot what it was, but it was like pouring 1 cup of bleach in your coffee makes your teeth whiter or some shit like that.
Well, if it does come,
because now that's some idiot. Because and I've seen this happen.
Yeah, exactly. Some idiot. But should I be arrested because some idiot took my joke literally?
No.
well, if it comes to the fact that
people are going to do stupid things no matter what.
If it was a child,
with it, like if you just said, even jokingly said, "Hey, look, drink bleach," and someone did that, and you were clearly joking, there is also the intention. If someone's a dumbass and just drinks bleach for whatever reason, and that's really on them, not really.
Well, not necessarily. Look at I beg to differ. Look at if Jim had been if he was talking to somebody he was talking to somebody who had mental issues, somebody who was mentally compromised, somebody who had very low IQ or retardation of some sorts, and Jim was just kidding around and saying, "Hey, you know what? You need to go drink bleach. Yeah, bleach is really good for you." Now they don't have the skill set to rationalize if that's a bad idea, and they do so. He is negligent.
It's about the context, I guess, isn't it? Because
yes, I think there's more to it than that.
Yeah, but in the case of a religion, wouldn't that context be there to give them that blame? Because if Jim just posted that on Twitter, like a picture saying, "Oh, adding a cup of bleach," that's different to standing in front of somebody who has the potential to interpret that literally and telling them to drink bleach because it's good for you.
That is my point exactly. Is that it is a statement made, saying, put 1 cup of bleach in your coffee will make your teeth whiter. You're not directing that at anybody, but you're putting the information out there for everybody who follows you and sees that to look at, and it is up for them to individually decide whether or not that is good information.
It depends
on
honestly.
information comes either though.
Well, that's when the law comes in and investigates context. If they can prove,
but what law?
Hold on. If it depends on what country you're in. If they can prove, the law can prove in court, and they decide that they want to press charges, that you put that information out there maliciously to misinform people, that you honestly were trying to get people to drink bleach, then yes, that is against the law. But if they can't prove that, and because it was nothing but a joke, then no, it is not against the law.
Mm-hmm.
But also, it's sort of like, if you take that in the context of a religion, it also changes this, because I get it's sort of like an analogy to having a religion tell people to that they can handle snakes, whatever. But there's the context of that people want to believe in religions because they've based their lives on it. So in essence, it's sort of like, it is like standing in front of a person, like this is going to sound bad, but it is in essence similar to standing in front of somebody who doesn't know any better and telling them to drink bleach. It's not the same. I wouldn't equate it with just putting a picture of a meme on Twitter or something. I think it's a bit.
But here's the thing: people have been arrested for like contributing to people committing suicide, right? People have harassed people and they've committed suicide over it. There are things that can be construed as bullying, that could be construed as taking advantage of a mentally deficient person. So I think that there is some accountability here. If people do take bad advice like this, maybe they should have a little more accountability for their actions.
And exactly, they should, because out there in real life, I've seen situations where there has been what's been called a soy sauce challenge, or a soy sauce detox, in the fact that people on Facebook have posted anonymously that if you drink a full liter of soy sauce within an hour or 2 hours, that you will have a rather violent but also rather efficient colonic detox. And people have been fully paralyzed, like tetraplegic and all, because of it, and it's taken them absolutely years to recover from it.
Exactly.
So and the law that you're looking for, I don't know who it was that said it, but the law you are looking for generally is criminal neglect with intent to harm.
Yeah, no, I am on board with that, man. I think there's definitely something to be said for that.
Well, I mean, for example, the snake handling one is good example. I wanted to come back to this. I wanted to come back to this one earlier, before we move too far past it. But like Kentucky is one of the states where you see a lot of this snake handling stuff happening, and it's illegal to handle snakes as part of a religious ceremony there. Like, it is against the law. But the first off, the law is never enforced, and if it was enforced, the maximum you can get for it is, I think, $100 fine. So which is
not much of a deterrent.
Right, but they've done this as like so the law is in place, so like and has been recognized that it does not infringe on your religious freedoms for them to say that you cannot handle snakes as part of a religious ceremony. But it's still a widely practiced thing in that region because the law just isn't enforced.
Yeah, it's an ineffective law to begin with. But Caleb, what
I was going to say is I think a better comparison than the bleach thing is, remember back I don't know when it was, but when they were people were posting those iPhone life hacks, like putting your iPhone in the microwave charges it and stuff like that. I think that's a better comparison because they're coming from a position of authority, like pretending they're Apple and stuff. And that's where I think the sort of the church comparison is better, because the church is an authority and they are viewed as an authority, and they're viewed as somebody who you should listen to because they know what they're talking about. And those people who like posted online the guides, put your iPhone in the microwave, or your iPhone is waterproof, that sort of thing. That's the sort of comparison that's going on there, because that is the neglect that's going on. It's coming from people who imply they have authority over those other people.
One other problem that I see that could possibly arise from this, like looking at this, as I'm thinking more about it, all I can think of is that, whatever parameters we set, whatever we decide, that the religion should operate in, that will only work in context to modern society. So this is going to have to be something that is fluid, something that is ever changing. So then the acceptance of religious practice would also have to be fluid. So this couldn't be anything that is concrete. So it has to be something that is very much changing.
Well, it has to change with our societal changes. Morality changes over time. Yes,
right. But religion, though, religious doctrine lasts millennia.
We have to catch up with the times, though. We're going into, it'll be 2020 next year, and we are going into a whole new brave new frontier with technology when discoveries are out there with quantum gravity waves and understanding of technology to the point where we can do things that even 50 years ago was unimaginable. I want to see more focus on that, and I want to see children learning things that are correct. And all my argument has been is, should we allow for children to have indoctrination of things that we know are false? I'm not talking about religion. I want to make this very clear. People have the religious freedoms, but with religious ideas that we know are wrong, period. Right? And I'm not, again, talking about like resurrection. People can say, well, we know it's biologically impossible to raise from the dead. That's not what I'm talking about. I am talking about the core beliefs, things that they posit as science. It is scientifically proven that the earth is 7,000 years old. No, it's bullshit. You're wrong. That kind of stuff. That's my argument. And I think that it doesn't violate the kids' freedom. I don't think it violates the parents' religious freedom to prevent people from putting out misinformation in a private school. That's the argument I'm putting forth. I don't know how valid an argument is. Like I said, that's why I wanted to have this hangout, to kind of hear both sides on it, because it's not an easy topic, to go in and change parental rights. But I think we, as we learn more and we understand that a lot of these religious practices are bullshit, we have to do something. Too many deaths are occurring because of this stuff. Too much harm is happening. When I read Katie Polson's, with her blog on Pathos, Without the Crystal Ball, I'm just outraged. I'm just fucking outraged. I love her shit. I'm not mad at her for writing it. She needs to expose the stuff, so don't really think that. But it's visceral, right? And when I read stuff that's happening with the Catholic Church, it bothers me, right? I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? How does anybody think that this shit is legit? This is a criminal organization that's getting carte blanche freedom because of the name of a religion, because they've been around for so long. That's bullshit. And again, I know I'm sounding like an anti-theist, and I really don't want to, right? I'm not trying to promote anti-theism or atheism or any agenda. I'm not into that shit or into any of that crap. All I want to do is promote what's right. But I'm having a very hard time justifying, from an ethical standpoint, that how we allow these things to continue without the more pushback. Because I'm not saying enough, to be honest with you.
So, and to answer that question simply, the quick and simple and most effective answer is no. They should not be exposed to that unless, of course, they find their way to that. They should not be exposed to that as a presupposition as a preface and as an absolute authority. Straight up, no.
And I guess I would have liked to get I would have liked to have had Saitan Brunicate in this particular hangout. He would have been a counterpoint, but he is on the road, so he'll come in next week probably. I want to get Sai and SJ and a few other people into these discussions more often. I know Sai's been asking to, and he wants to, because he's a good counterpoint, because we don't agree on anything.
Well, one of the things that bothers me about religion in the United States is that in direct opposition to the Constitution, parents are still allowed and even encouraged to indoctrinate their kids. And like you said, unless somebody comes to it on their own free will, it shouldn't be done. So I mean, shouldn't there be some protections in place, just like there are for children in abuse situations and everything else? Shouldn't there be some sort of psychological abuse system set in place that prevents the indoctrination? And if so, I mean, what would that look like? Just because indoctrination can be so subtle.
Well, again, I can't disallow the parents teaching the belief of God. That's I have no say in that. I have no dog in that fight. That's your guys' shtick, right? I mean, you're much more anti-theist in that regard. Res $5. Religion should be treated for what it is, a cult. Well, by the broadest interpretation of religion, it means formal venerable worship in some regards, right? You won't see it listed that way, but religion is generally formal venerable worship, which is a cult. So they do mean synonymous terms in the very large way of looking at that word religion. But I don't want to say that but parents shouldn't allow indoctrination of religion. What I'm more concerned of is indoctrination, again, of things that we know that are not true in regards to the religion. We know you can't handle snakes and be safe. That's bullshit. So that there's something needs to be done, which is not that big of a deal, but it happens. I mean, it's not.
But we also know the Earth isn't 6,000 years old,
right?
See, I think we can handle that with existing laws, kind of like I said, just with a slight alteration. Right now. Oh, well, right now we require kids of a certain age have to go to school. They just do.
Yes.
If we don't include, if we don't allow a school which is teaching misinformation to be to qualify as education in that regard.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's not education in that regard.
Exactly.
You mean like homeschool?
And so they
well, hang on, Oscar. I thought they had to give a certain, at least, level of proper academic education, even in homeschool.
Yes, and
private school.
Yes, homeschool. It depends on the state. It really depends on the state. But what I'm saying is, if we actually created a standard where, this is the educational standard, period, end of story. And if the school does not meet that educational standard, then it does not qualify as you are sending your kid to school. Now you can send that kid to the school separately on like an after school program where they get indoctrinated into dinosaurs and man walk together, what the hell ever. That's up to you. But I think that would be a great first step at fighting at least the most egregious indoctrinations like young earth creationism.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. And by the way, it looks like he's turning out the cams. Sokka, you got to think, and then I got to wrap this up. I want to keep this under 2 hours.
Okay, just real quick, just to address the homeschooling thing, is that there are many states who have what they call a no notice policy, like Texas, Oklahoma, Idaho, Missouri, Indiana, Michigan, a whole bunch of states that do not require any contact with federal officials or any state or anybody. That they don't have to report curriculum, what they're doing, grades, or anything.
Yeah.
Here in Missouri,
Sokka, go ahead. Let's Sokka go real quick then Reverend.
So I think
he raised his hand, unlike the rest of you. The people on the outside can't see, but in Zoom, people can raise their hand, a little icon that comes up. So,
yeah, how do you do that?
So
don't tell them.
There's a distinction that needs to be made within the context of this conversation, and that is that the responsibility for this lies on like all of us to call out bad practices, and understand that there's a difference between the snake handling is a good example. The Jehovah's Witness blood transfusions is a great example. Is that there is nothing that limits someone's beliefs. Like the government can't limit what you believe. What you choose to believe is absolute. That's fine. That's where the religious freedom comes in. But in the practice is where the government can regulate this. So the government can come along and say, listen, you have absolutely every right in the world to believe that you can handle snakes. But too fucking bad, you're not doing it. Okay? That's not an infringement of your religious freedom. The religious freedom is only about what you can believe. Okay?
No, I disagree. Look, you're allowed to believe anything you fucking want. I mean, there's no such thing as a thought police, right? The religious freedom is how you act upon those beliefs. That's what religious freedom.
The religious freedom extends only as far as what someone can actually, what someone can believe. The practices of that religion are things that don't need to fall under religious freedom. So it's the same thing with like the blood transfusions, and a lot of this is like just confusion from people and how they interpret this stuff. Is that a Jehovah's Witness has every right in the world to believe that blood transfusions are bad for their children, but a doctor doesn't have to believe that. And a doctor, in cases such as an emergency, will give them the child a blood transfusion and not be held responsible at all, or be thought to have violated that person's religious freedom. In Canada, is a prime example is that we have Jehovah's Witnesses up here as well, and there was a girl that was undergoing, I think it was some type of chemotherapy for some type of cancer. I can't remember what it was, but she needed a blood transfusion, and the doctors gave her one, even against her own wishes. She was 14, and she tried to sue the government for that they infringed her religious freedom. They said no, we didn't. Because, and the same basic thing was like, nobody stopped you from having your beliefs. No one stopped you and told you that you couldn't believe that blood transfusions are wrong. That's fine. But unfortunately, as a minor, we have a certain responsibility to protect you. And this happened, and too bad.
As a minor, yes. But if the parent explicitly said no, then that's where it would come in, because freedom of religious freedom does not just cover your freedom of thought or your religious conscience. It's also the freedom to practice said religion. I mean, and not just practice it, but to if you hold a conviction, a really firm belief in this, and you can prove that you believe in this wholeheartedly, then many of the cases it's justified as a religious belief.
Not if it is a violation of the law.
Well, I mean, of course not. I mean,
right.
Objectively,
and reckless endangerment of a minor because of religious belief is not something that you can't include a blood
transfusion is not against the law.
Pardon me?
Refusing a blood transfusion.
Also,
right. Refusing a blood transfusion is not against the law. But if a doctor was to give you a blood transfusion in a case of an emergency, they would not be held in a position that they have violated your religious freedoms. They would not be held liable.
Sure. Yeah, and that's fine. But if you have the parent sitting right there, and they explicitly say that they do not want a blood transfusion, and that blood transfusion is not done, and the child dies, then that parent is not held responsible in most cases.
Well, the parent should be held responsible in that case, I'd say.
In cases, they have been held responsible, but we're talking like if and when they're punished, it's a slap on the wrist.
Yeah, but I guess that's the sort of thing that needs to be changed, and that's what I think Steve's sort of asking, is it?
Yeah.
2 hours later, we're at the beginning of the conversation.
Yeah, 2 hours later, we're gonna go for part 2 because I got to end this. I got to go. Yeah. I have another obligation, but I like I said, I'm gonna be having more of these chats more often, and I like the fact that Zoom you can call in, come in. I can control who comes and goes. It's not like Hangout where people can snipe it or bomb it, because you have a lot more control over it. So I know a lot of people have their hands up, but I got to go, guys. So I'm going to wrap this up, but I think this is productive. I think these conversations are productive. I want to get more sussing out of positions, not necessarily what maybe you advocate, but maybe, is it a good argument, right? Because again, I'm not advocating that we actually implement some of these things, but I'm asking maybe should we? I don't know. Right?
It's important to. I think in order to find a solution, it's important to argue both sides of it to find common ground. I mean, it's really important to understand both sides before you make a conclusion.
Well, obviously, because you can't know, if you can't just know one side of an issue and make laws or make decisions based on one side of an issue. That's it, Caleb. You nailed it.
Yeah, and that I'm gonna leave it at that just says it all right there. Unless you got something else to add, can you top that?
To find the reality of the subject at hand, you need to have a look at every single exhaustible option, whether it's for or against.
There you go.